Hi, I'm Jim McCarthy, co-founder of Stellar, and I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the future of the live entertainment business and what's ahead now. Looking forward from where I'm sitting in August of 2020, the path ahead of us in live entertainment is pretty hard to see, and frankly not that bright. It's still impossible for us to resume business as usual, and we don't really know when that's going to end. And so in moments of this kind of uncertainty, I've always found that it's pretty wise to think about the things you can control and the things you can't control. So I want to break that down for you a bit and point out a couple of things that are and aren't in our control. Let's start with things that we can't control. We know that we cannot control the pandemic. We, the people in the live entertainment industry, maybe society can, but we're going to be just on the receiving end of whatever happens there. What we can say at this point, however, is that the most optimistic scenarios that we were hoping for in the spring are not going to pan out. We will not be returning to the venues this fall. We won't be selling tickets in late summer, and there's no question that we're dealing with less favorable scenarios than that. In fact, the way I think about it is there's really two scenarios ahead of us. There's the scenario that I would characterize as not great, and that's the one where we're selling tickets for in-person events in late 2020, and maybe something resembling normal-ish is sinking in or setting in about March of next year. That's not great. But the other scenario that's out there is what I call terrible, and that is that the idea of returning in early 2021 becomes increasingly unlikely, and that the idea of being able to point to a place in the calendar and say, oh, we'll definitely be back to normal by then, kind of disappears over the horizon. We can't control which of those scenarios happens. We're going to be simply on the, we're just going to be victims of circumstance when it comes to that. But what I want to talk to you about, what I want to focus on is what we can control. Because I believe strongly in the value and power of online events to make a difference to the industry. And so what we can control is how we approach the whole issue of innovating and learning how to produce good online events. And I see it basically as having two choices. On the one hand, we can ignore them. I think some people went down this path partly because they believed that the optimistic scenarios were going to play out and they'd be back in business sooner rather than later. But as that's not happening, I think the other option becomes increasingly important to take seriously, and that is embracing and learning how to create and deliver great online events. Okay, so what I want you to think about here is there's one thing we can't control, and there's one thing we can. There's a choice that's going to be made for us, essentially, and a choice that we're going to make ourselves. We're going to find out whether we're in the not great or the terrible scenario when it comes to getting back into the venues. But we have the choice of either ignoring online events or learning and embracing how to deliver great online events. Now, the way I want to think about this is what happens in each one of these scenarios. Right? There are two things, two outcomes, two scenarios that could happen, and two choices that we can make. Well, what happens when we combine all those? Well, let's start with the idea that what we get, unfortunately, is the terrible scenario, and we're not really back in the venues for as much as a year from now. And let's assume also that we ignore online events. I characterize this as the perish quadrant. And what I mean by that is not that anybody who does this won't survive, but that you're at very serious risk unless you just happen to have a lot of resources of not making it through the crisis. I don't want anybody to fall into this quadrant. Okay, but let's assume that it's a little bit better and that we get the not great scenario instead of the terrible scenario. I know, not great, you were hoping for better, but it looks like that's what we've got. Well, in that scenario, if you ignore online events, this is what I call the struggle quadrant. This is one where you may have some close scrapes and just get through. Now, it doesn't mean everybody would get through. It depends a lot on the individual circumstances, but struggle still ain't great. Now, let's say that instead of that, you embrace and you learn how to deliver great online events, and we have the terrible scenario. I think in this case, you've really maximized your chances to survive what would be a terrible situation, a truly terrible turn of events and situation. And that's a lot better than struggling, and it's a lot better than perishing. And finally, if we have the not great scenario and we embrace and learn online events, there's actually a reasonable chance that you can thrive. I've already seen this begin to take hold with a number of artists where they're actually finding a groove that's getting them places they weren't even at before. Every one of these is a sort of a hypothetical idea, and people will fall into all four of these quadrants and have different outcomes. But that's the way I want to think about this. We can't control what happens with the pandemic. We can control what we do with online events, and we really increase our chances of surviving or even thriving. But I want to add one more thing here. One that combines everything you're going to learn and develop with online events with a return to the in-person event. When those two things are combined and they build on each other, you won't perish, you won't struggle, you won't just survive, you won't just thrive. You stand a really good chance that you just might boom. And what I mean by that is a kind of success, a kind of prosperity, and a kind of breakthrough in your organization or in your art that wasn't possible before online events. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean structural profitability instead of the very dicey industry that we all know we live in. Infinite potential audience. Think about that. More audience all over the world than you could possibly have inside your venue. On an industry scale, billions, not just millions of new revenue. For everybody, multiplying, not just adding to your fan base, and basically previously impossible breakthroughs, artistically, financially, and otherwise, that are going to be available because of the tool of online events. And if you want to know when the time to start is, it's now. I got a couple of pieces of evidence to prove that to you here. On the left is this information is going to feel really familiar, just Zoom usage. Oh my goodness. If you'd told me a year ago that everybody I know would use Zoom every day, I wouldn't have believed you. Of course, this data is even old. This is just from April. It's already much, much higher than that. The point of this is to say people are doing things virtually and online that they never would have done before, and every day they're getting more capable of it, they're getting more used to it, and entertainment is not any different, and it's not going to be any different. The second thing I want to point out on the right is this is a graph of a learning curve. And what this is the number of times you do something and your success. It takes a certain amount of time to go through. You see this slow beginning, right? That's there's actually a saying that for 90% of the time that you're learning to ride a unicycle, you're not actually riding a unicycle, you're falling, right? Because the early part of learning anything involves a really slow growth that leads to breakthroughs, the steep acceleration, and the success that you see on this graph. You want to be putting in the time now to get through the slow beginning, do your learning, and be in a position to succeed with online events. And so that's why I say the market is ready. We all need time to grow and get better at these events and learn how they can really benefit us while we can't do the in-person events, and so the time to start is now. If you're not sure what to do, we're here to help. Talk to us at Stellar about getting an event off the ground. We have a lot of resources, and we have a system, a total show management system, to make it easier than anywhere else for you to get your first live event off the ground in an awesome way. I don't often quote Lenin, but when I do, it's this quote. Lenin once said, "There are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen." We're living in that kind of time right now. We're living in a time when weeks are happening, decades are happening inside weeks. And the opportunities that opens up for us, despite all the challenges, are very real. For us, the idea of online events is an open door. Now, sometimes people see an open door and they worry. They think that something's going to come in from the outside that we're not ready for, or it's a threat. But what I want you to think about is that the pandemic has opened up a door that previously was slammed pretty firmly shut. It's a door to online events as a possible supercharger to your regular business model. It's an invitation to a very bright future. We'd love to help you and everybody in the industry find that bright future. So please let us know how we can help. Thanks very much.